Welcome, listeners, to a LinkedIn Live session. This session is called Agent Powered Work in the Future of AI. My name is Kurt Rolland, and I'm with Covenant Technology Partners. I'm a principal architect with the firm. And with me, I have Scott Ringle, who's Covenant's Chief AI and Innovation Officer. And we're happy to be with you here today on this executive briefing where we'll be focusing in on the future of AI and how you can incorporate agent powered work today.
Glad to be here, Kurt. Thanks for having me. This is actually a really important conversation. I'd like to kind of tee this up for a second before we move forward with some of the questions. But a lot of executives today are hearing terms like agents and agentic AI and co-pilots, digital labor, automation, terms like that. And honestly, a lot of the market's still blending those ideas together. So what I'd like to do today is kind of take this down to a practical level, not theoretical, not buzzword heavy, not vendor theater, and get down to what really matters. And that's what we're going to achieve today, hopefully. So let's get into it.
Sounds good, Scott. Thanks for that summary, that intro. So, Scott, what's changed here recently? What makes agent-powered work in 2026 an executive priority instead of just a future concept?
Yeah, Kurt, and actually that's the right place to start because for a while, a lot of executives heard the term agents, as I just said, and they assumed it was just a next wave of AI hype. What changed is actually pretty straightforward. Three things matured at the same time, finally. First, the economic pressure got real. Every executive team today is being asked to grow faster, increase speed, improve services, expand productivity. Of course, without letting operating costs grow at the same rate. Small problem there. So the appetite for leverage is much higher now than it's not just theoretical, it's real leverage. And second, the technology crossed a threshold. We're no longer talking about AI that's just chats and summarizes or answers questions. The systems can now handle multi-step tasks, use tools, work across systems, reason through sequences, and operate with context, which is a big difference. In fact, it's a category-defining difference. And thirdly, this is the big one. The control layer started to catch up, which has been a big blocker. Control, governance, compliance. Now we can think in terms of enterprises or mid-market accounts, identity, permissions, approval boundaries, observability, auditability, human escalation, policy enforcement. I can go on and on. The change, it kind of changes the whole conversation because now the question is no longer, can AI help people do work? Now the question is, where can I deploy trusted digital labor to create measurable business value? And that's why, because of this executive criteria, the priorities have changed. The demos didn't get more entertaining or more enlightening. The combination of capability, economics, and governance made it operationally real. I'm going to say that again. It's operationally real now, and that is a massive difference. And if I may expand on that just a little, I think this is where a lot of people still underestimate the shift. There's still a real viewing of AI through a lens of software tools. They don't think of it like an actual entity that can operate within the business. And that's a big misconception. It's not just a better application layer. It's the beginning of a new execution layer for businesses globally, from mid-market to enterprise, pick a flavor, it doesn't matter. And that's a big change. So traditionally, we know what the past is. We've moved to this level. I'm going to put it over to you for the next question, I think, because there's going to be a lot. I can dive into that for an hour by itself, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a lot to cover here.
Yeah.
So when executives hear, quote, agent-powered work, right, and we hear this a lot, what should they understand, again, without getting overly technical?
Okay. Well, and the simplest way to explain it, I think, is this. Agent's not just a chatbot. It's not just better search. It's not just automation with a more fashionable name, if you will. Agent is a governed digital worker that can pursue a goal, much like a human. Give it an objective. Give it access to the right systems and data, and then define what it's allowed to do. And then within those boundaries, it can carry out work across multiple steps. It's not just automation. Think about that for a second. That's beyond automation. So when I talk to C-suite executives or board members or even VCs and PEs, private equity and venture capital firms, we talk about agents the same way they talk about people on a team. A person has a role. They have access to certain systems. They have objectives and mechanisms. And when they need, they escalate. When things happen, they need to escalate, they can. So that's the right mental model, if you will, to kind of think about this. When we say powered work, what we really mean is you're adding a new workforce layer, basically, to your business. It's a governed layer of digital labor that can take on structured, repeatable, context-rich type work and proceed with that in a very, let's just say, expeditious fashion with X number of ROI. We can get into all kinds of data models on that. But the bottom line is it's not really about buying another AI feature. It's about redesigning how you get work done. And that's the best way to put it. Now, I can add one thing to that, though. There's a distinction that kind of matters here. Because of an executive here, can I talk to you? If an executive hears that this is software conversation based, if they think it's about a software conversation, they're kind of thinking in their minds it's the wrong set of questions, really, because they might ask questions like, what models are we using? What tools are we buying? What features do we receive? But if they hear it's a workforce or an operating model conversation, they think of it completely differently. So where does value show up? What work should be redesigned? How and what authority should agents have? What should humans be doing in this human in the loop I hear so much about? How do we govern this, et cetera? That's the right mindset. So really it's a mindset shift, not just on the technology, but how we view using it and the types of questions we want to engage with it. So that's a serious conversation that starts a lot of, let's just say, deeper thought processes within the organization. And we have many of those. Back to you. I don't want to continue on that. I can go on for, again, too long on that conversation as well.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I guess given the workforce notion of a digital worker, really, rather than thinking about technology and large language models, to your point, right?
Mhm.
Executives should really be thinking about skills. What kind of worker skills do I need in order to optimize and transform my organization, right?
Right.
Forget about technology. It's really skills. It's a skill
That's
set.
exactly what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me move to the next question. So, where are agents creating value that traditional automation couldn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where the category kind of gets really interesting. Traditional automation is excellent when the workflow is rigid. You've probably heard this before. It's predictable, it's rule-based, it's consistent. The path is fixed. Traditional automation works very well. You think RPA, you think process automation. We've been doing it for years. It works well when we have a very structured environment. However, most enterprise work does not behave this way. We know that. Real workflows are messy. They span multiple systems. They involve partial information, bad data that's not structured correctly. They exclude exceptions. They require context. In many cases, they require judgment. So that's where agents create a lot of value. They're strongest in workflows that are cross systems, cross platforms, cross functional, exception heavy. Think about that for a second. Exceptions are heavy. Things that require humans to think about it. There's an exception to this rule, so it doesn't follow that structured process. That breaks up RPA type. So context dependent is also another one. So let's take a systems integrator such as yourself for an example. A traditional automation tool might move fields from one form to another. That's useful, sure, absolutely, but it's limited. So an agent can do something much more valuable. It can read a request for proposal or an RFP. It can pull prior statements of work or SOWs. It can compare assumptions. It can identify missing requirements. It can highlight delivery risk, a big one. It can surface legal or security concerns, another big one. It can estimate where margin erosion might happen. And it can actually even draft a response. In some cases, actually send the response out through the right processes to give it to the client directly with having the human just check that off at the very last second. It can escalate. There's so many things we can get into. That's a conversation in and of itself also, but it's not simple automation. It's workflow, my new phrase, by the way, it's workflow participation. That's what it really is. Workflow participation, collaborating with your agents with what you currently do. It's a much stronger level of value. So this applies to patterns too across customer service and procurement, compliance, operations, internal IT. I could give you a laundry list of use cases, and I'm not a fan of that word. We'll talk about that later. It's almost an unlimited amount of strategic insertion of this type of process that could accelerate businesses to the next level. So again, I often say it this way: traditional automation automates steps. Agents are starting to orchestrate outcomes. That's the leap. And back to you.
Yeah, so I think the important point is that traditional automation hasn't gone away. And so because we're in an AI era, it doesn't mean that everything now has to be AI, available or generated or have
Yep.
that capability, right? There is
Right.
still a role for
Yep.
traditional automation.
Absolutely.
To your point, the question really is, are you moving into or away from a deterministic, right, or rules-based approach, right? And if you are, typically the human element, that cognitive element, has been the one to fill the gap, right? And
That's right.
that's the space that AI can play, right?
That's exactly right. We're
Yep.
seeing more and more of it. And then another thing, speaking of more and more of it, there's a little bit of a caution I want to add. We're seeing some of this out there as well. I've seen what's called agent washing. It's not a formal term, but it's happening. We see you take a scripted bot, an older style agent, if you will, but it's not really an agent. It's a rule engine or a simple chat bot, and they rename it as an agent. And that can be useful, but it's not the same thing. Real agents' values show up when when the system can operate within context, handle ambiguity, navigate exceptions like we talked about, and contribute, it's the big one here, contribute to end-to-end business results. There's a big difference between the two. But you're right. There's a place for automation, traditional automation, deterministic, rule-based. It works extremely well, very predictable. AI, well, we just talked about where it does. It cannot do certain things as well as RPA can. In fact, there are definitely times when RPA has its place. It's not that it won't do the job, but it's harder to manage that job with AI as opposed to RPA. But again, another conversation. And
Right.
I'll put it back to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, just to close the loop on that before we move to the next question. So, there are many examples of incorporating, as you mentioned, RPA, or it's also known as computer use,
Mhm.
along with cognitive abilities or AI abilities. So even those two are not necessarily completely separate, but can work in conjunction with one another. So,
Right.
yeah. Well, let me ask the next question. So, leaders often worry about things like control, risk, and trust. So, how should executives be thinking about governing agents?
This is a great topic right here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one. Let's I said this isn't going to be a vendor call, but I'm going to pull out some names just for a second here. The hyperscales, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, others as well. We've made massive accelerations in this specific area, which is why it's become much easier for clients to get into this agentic space and have digital labor, digital workforce, because of the compliance and governance risk being baked in, if you will, to the hyperscale models. So that's a big conversation right there. We'll table that for a second. But as I view agents, let me view this in a very simple way. Govern agents the same way you govern new employees, really. It's the cleanest framework. It's the simplest to understand. If you hired someone new in your company, you'd not give them unrestricted access to everything on day one. You're not going to let them approve contracts or move money or change policy or many other things, make customer commits without oversight. Agents should be treated the exact same way. They need to have guardrails. They need to have governance around them. They need to have management. A better way to put it is not guardrails and all these terms that we use in technology. It's more the way a human would be governed. Think of it that way, and you'll be leaps and bounds ahead of the average person that's doing this, because when you think in that mindset, you'll accelerate much faster with current AI models. And I don't mean to say models, bad word there. So usually agents will be treated the same way, like I said. So I usually break governance into 5 layers. First, we have identity. Every agent should have its own identity. You need to know that, what it is, what it does, what it operates, what it touches, and what actions it attributes to it. So think about that again. Agents have an identity. It's very important. So we know exactly what they're supposed to do and not do. And from there, once we know the identity, a lot of people give them names. They're like real people. So second is permissions. Least privilege, of course. Only the systems, data, and tools that actually needs to perform its functions are given to it. Thirdly, authority boundaries. What can it actually read? What can it recommend? What can it draft? What can it execute? What can it commit? Things like that. Those are the different trust thresholds. Fourth, human escalation. If actions touches money, policy, contracts, regulations, brands, I'm going to go on and on. Customer experience commits. There are so many different variables in there. But if it touches it, you got to really analyze what it touches and why and how. Human approval boundaries should exist for all of those categories. And fifth, observability. This is that important layer we talked about earlier. This is that governance and compliance. How do we track this? We can't have a black box in there where agents are running rogue and doing what they want to do and you're hoping for the best result. So logs, telemetry, audit trails, evaluations, intervention capabilities is a huge one. What are the intervention steps? if something goes rogue or goes wrong, how do we have a policy in place that stops that from happening? Those are parts of these conversations that get into great detail. So if you can't see what the agent's doing, you're not governing it. You're hoping it's going to do the best job it can. And that's not a control framework. Hope does not justify controlling frameworks. So let me add one more thing to that. Key messaging here is also governance is not what slows scale. This is an important conversation. A lot of what we hear out there is people want to go so fast, but they want security. And then people come back that are doing this on the IT, especially, or on the systems integration side. Not to put down systems integration, it's actually the people that are driving the messaging. But the point of the matter is governance is critical to actually accelerate, not to slow down. Because without governance, you have pilots. With governance, you have production. So it becomes more seamless as we're putting together these workflows and having these newer discovery sessions with clients. These types of governance and compliance issues we're talking about now are baked into that process. So from day one, and we'll get into a conversation on why operationalizing business models through artificial intelligence is the core operating system today. It's not just operations of the business. I could take it another layer, because in reality, what we're really doing is we're taking it down to the nucleus of the company, where everything is pointing at an AI and everything is connected to it, be your data fabric, be it whatever it may be. Everything runs from this core. But again, that's another much deeper, more technical conversation. But as we're shaping these policies and processes, these are all the things we're thinking about to get the client to the next level in their business, to be able to not only scale this particular, I'm going to use this word use case, which I don't normally use, this particular stepping stone or use case to get into this new behavior, if you will. We really document this in a way that makes it a seamless process to where they see it as more of a business outcome, not this tech stack. So again, I'll turn it over to you, Kurt, because I could go on for a long time on that conversation.
I think before we leave this point, we'd probably be remiss if we hadn't talked about cost observability, right? Because we know that agents are not free.
That's very true.
Especially when you're looking at perhaps a labor offset or a business transformation improvement, optimizations and these kinds of things, right? You need to be able to track and understand what the agent cost is, that factor through observability. Maybe you could touch on that real quick.
I'm sorry, the audio cut out one more time. Could you repeat the last half of that sentence?
Oh, yeah. Just the cost observability as it relates to agent governance.
Agent governance and cost is critical. So without getting too technical, as we're architecting these business workflows and these processes, there are a lot of ways that we determine total cost of ownership as we build things out. And today, without getting super deep into this, the reality is how we choose models, how we choose frameworks, how we choose what the process is going to look like. When you look at how models are built out today, everyone talks about AI models. Models are actually about 10 to 15, maybe 20% of what goes into an agentic workflow. It's the systems around them, the framing. You'll hear the word harness. There's a harness around this. That harness is this set of tools around the model that allow it to do what it does. In fact, Claude, everyone's heard of Claude or ChatGPT. It's actually a harness around their model. That's actually a framework around the models themselves that allow you to interface with it. So that Claude Cowork, very popular. Inside Microsoft, we have Cowork now as well. Those types of frameworks are what allow you to engage with models. But how does the price get determined by how we use this? We have very smart ways now of reducing costs within model development agent development and workflow. We use one large language model for maybe orchestration. And we use smaller models that do things very quickly that are much less expensive, that allow you to have the same result, with actually sometimes and more often than not, faster results without costing 30 cents per, or $30 per million tokens. And that's, again, getting deeply technical, versus a matter of pennies for a million tokens. And again, bad exaggeration, but the point is we pick and choose models and architectures based on the use case, and we align that, and it automatically can adjust for the client so that we make sure that their total cost of ownership is down. Is that where you were heading with this, Kurt, or did you have something else?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that we got that on the table here in this conversation. So let's move on to our next question. So if a CEO or CIO wants to explore what we've been talking about here without overcommitting their firm, right? What's the smart first move for them?
I'll tell you what, let me start with what's not the smart first move, which was what we all used to do just about a year and a half ago. The smart move is not to launch a giant enterprise AI initiative with 40 use cases, with 12 people in the committee and a big PowerPoint strategy. That's where momentum dies very fast on the vine. We've proven this over and over again because we didn't really know how to attack this stuff. So we thought, put a bunch of use cases out there, define them, bring them back down, and put these committees together, centers of excellence. And that can be done today, but it doesn't really drive the value proposition or get time to value with agents in production faster, not even a little bit. It actually slows the process down massively. And that's why things tend to die on the vine. So the first move is much narrower. It's myopic. It's specific. We're going to pick one workflow. We're going to give it an accountable owner. That workflow has an owner. We're going to define a very small number of measurable KPIs or some sort of performance indicator that you can determine. And we're going to make sure those economics are very observable. So we have a very easy success criteria to know if we're failing or succeeding very early on, much like microservice architecture, an old term, right? Monolithic applications are out, microservices in. We can take small pieces of an application and test and move without taking the whole application down. Similar concept. The workflow should have very specific things. We should have real friction, real delay, real cost, and maybe some real quality issues that we can actually identify. Some good examples might be, we talked about this earlier, a proposal to a statement of work, a service operations maybe, or customer onboarding process, or procurement, renewals, claims, compliance. Again, lots of things we can go from there. So from there, let's take it to the next level. Then we baseline the current state. How long does it take today? How many people touch this process? What are the bottlenecks currently? What do exceptions look like and how do they happen? What kind of error rates might we have and the cost of delay? This is where the money comes down to it. This is where it gets into the finances. What's the definition of improvement? If we get 20% better improvement in this process, what does that look like? What does 30% look like? What does 50% look like? And how do we obtain that goal with a very strategic roadmap? So now you have the business case. Now that that's not an AI science project, it's a transformation motion. And that's the second piece that matters a lot. So I'll pause for a second, but the reality is that's kind of the overview, if you will, of how we think about this, but it's built in a way that can scale also later. This is an important conversation. We're not doing these one-off agents or pods of agents or clusters of agents. And by the way, that's another conversation. When you hear agent, it's usually never one, it's many performing a task or a process. So if we do this the right way, we're building, and you'll hear these terms all over the internet, all over everybody talking about it, an agent factory, Microsoft, Google, everybody, NVIDIA, doesn't matter who's doing it. An agent factory gives you that scalability. So where you have one project, you've started this process and this workflow, but now you can repeat that second one much faster, an overused word, repeatable IP, if you will. We've got that 80-20 rule in place where we have this infrastructure now because our data is now set up and we can now scale the business process because of our factory and our architecture. And I'm not going to get too deep into the architecture. It's not as difficult as it sounds. In fact, it's much easier now than it's ever been before. So with that in mind, these control planes and architectures and delivery methodologies give us that narrow focus to be able to repeat this process, not only at scale, but at cost scale, and to be able to factorize our agents in our entire business operation. Because remember, the goal is to have AI be the operating system. And if we look up operating system again on what an operating system does on a computer, it's very specific. What it does, how it handles a GPU, a CPU, how it handles process in the business, memory. Those are all part of what we're doing with AI and how every single workflow in every organization, regardless of vertical market, has the same concept of how we approach applying AI to it. So in a nutshell, that's my answer for that question. That's the first smart move, if that makes sense.
So Scott, let's think about the future here. And we know, based on the speed of technology, right, that months translate almost into technology years. Things are going so fast, right?
Yes.
We look ahead 12 to 24 months, right? What will separate the leaders from the laggards?
Okay, let me address that too. I'm gonna drop that 24-month off because I don't even want to think that far out, because in all reality, I could give you that, but it'd be marketing fluff. Let's just talk 12 months right now, because as you just said, it's exponential. It's quantum math. We are accelerating at those speeds. So companies that lead will not be the ones that have the most pilots. They'll be the ones that build an agent operating model. Back to that nucleus thing we were talking about. Those are the leaders, the ones that see this in a different mindset. That's the difference. Leaders will redesign workflows. They won't just bolt AI onto broken process, if you will. We see a lot of that. We're redefining business process every day, not just taking and putting AI on it. We're saying this doesn't make any sense. That's how we can do this 80% more efficiency. They'll own the enterprise context. This is what the leaders will have. That means data, permissions, policy, systems, knowledge, and business rules will be connected in a structured way. Again, these are the future states of how people will naturally operate. They'll build interoperability. The future is not one giant, I just used this term a second ago, it's not a giant monolithic agent. It's an ecosystem of agents, humans, systems, and tools working together. That's what forms this workflow. And that's the people that understand how this works as a synonymous team of units is going to be the governed team that gets out there to market fastest and has the most value from AI. That's where basically they will govern agent runtime. And that's not just theory, it's just in presentation and production. It's the real deal. This is the real deal, production level. We're not talking about POCs here. This is what's going to separate the leaders from the laggards. Cycle time, cost, quality, margin, all are going to accelerate because they are moving at scale with these types of operational models and having AI be at the nucleus. Again, we could talk a great deal about this, but the bottom line is those that see this as a different mindset, especially at the C-suite, board level, understand how to approach it. It's not a technology question. It's how do we improve our business process? We have this nucleus operating system that can come in and help us fix some of these problems we've had for, in many cases, multiple decades, depending on the size of the corporation. So that's, in a nutshell, how I'd answer that question.
Great. Well, we're pretty much winding down here. So I guess what I'd like to do is just kind of recap what we've talked about for almost the last half hour here. So the takeaways I would say would be one, we know that agents execute work. They're not just there to provide personal assistance. Right. So, we would encourage leadership to be looking at it from that perspective. Secondly, value is going to show up in speed, cost, and consistency across your business processes, right? Again, not just simply looking at, how much improvement does someone get by, let's say, generating a PowerPoint presentation using AI or ChatGPT or GPT. Lastly, start with one governed, measurable workflow. I like to think big, start small, and iterate often, right? So, Scott, what final thoughts do you have? And then maybe you could take us to a call to action.
I think, let me start with a call to action. It's not really an option any longer. People will eventually come around at the C-suite and every organization around the world, most have. And I had a bunch of numbers from Gartner, statistics and stats that I was going to throw out here. You know what? I pulled every single one of them out because it doesn't really matter. The numbers are staggering. They're all over. Everyone sees them every day. The best suggestion I can give anyone at the C-suite or board level is to think about what workflows are causing the most pain in the organization, what those costs are hitting your bottom line, what's your P&L, what's your EBITDA. How are you being affected by not getting the scale you want to get when your competitors are definitely doing it? How do you get that first workflow, that process, that business process defined, and then reach out to your systems integrator, Covenant here, to help you work through that? Because it's not a conversation about technology. It's truly a business conversation. I do it every day, all day. We aren't talking about models and tech and architecture. Yes, I know those things and we talk about them, but that is not what drives the value to especially the organization's executive team. They want to know what the P&L is. They want to know what EBITDA growth is. They want to know how they can operationalize their business in a way that saves them money on this side and accelerates this on the other side. This is the conversations we have in helping shape those business processes very, very myopically to help you move into that baby step of operationalize your whole corporation ultimately. That's where I think that the suggestion is for the next action item. As far as my takeaway, watch the market, watch the models. There's a lot going on with Anthropic and OpenAI right now. I won't get into that conversation. You see this model doing this. You got things going on with Meta. Watch that. That shapes the whole industry. Hyperscales are our landing zone. They have got amazing architecture in there. Nothing's changed. We have the place to put this that's safe, secure, governed. And if I was to get into a conversation on all the different technologies within, let's just say Microsoft, for example, it would be a long conversation that's probably going to be very well received by executive staff because the simplicity has been dumbed down exceedingly. Security is up. The ability to do this now is better than ever before in history. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, Scott, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Listeners, thank you for your time. We know you could be doing other things, but we all wish you good luck on your agentic journey. And please reach out to Covenant Technology Partners if we can help with any of your road mapping or journey considerations. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.